Thanks for joining us on the Page One podcast. I'm your host, Luke Peters, CEO of New Air Appliances. And before we get started in this interview with Sarah Dajani, we're going to be talking all about Amazon. But before we get started, let's just jump into my quick announcement here. Really need your help. If you're a vacation homeowner for a new cause that I'm working on, you guys can learn more at vetcation.org. That's vetcation.org. And basically, we're supporting veterans with dream vacations. So if you're a vacation homeowner, we got plenty of veterans that we can help, but we don't have enough homeowners. And we want to kind of sync them up with you on their dream vacation for them and their family. Go ahead and contact me on LinkedIn or head over to vetcation.org to learn more. So in this episode, you're going to learn from Sarah Dajani all about Amazon. She's working for a company called Boosted Commerce, which is acquiring these different Amazon sellers. And this is kind of a macro trend that we're seeing in Amazon right now. So we're going to learn all about that trend, what different brands and sellers can do to better improve their odds of being acquired, and also just a little bit about her background. And then we'll get into some of the numbers, what KPIs are looked at. And again, just kind of setting companies up that are selling on Amazon, how they can think about acquisition. But then also maybe if you're, happy with your Amazon business, you might take away some KPIs and different ways to think about your business from this conversation. So Sarah, welcome to the Page One podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. I'm doing very well. How about you?
Doing awesome. Looking forward to this conversation. And then Sarah, before I let you kind of give a little bit more on your intro, I'll kind of read out a few things I have here. So you went to both, so you went to Princeton and Stanford, like two of the most, I went to Long Beach State, by the way, so I barely graduated high school. So you're, about 10 years ahead of me on education. And you have, a bunch of recognitions from both of those amazing universities. And you also were named a Consultant of the Year at Bain & Company in Dubai. So it looks like you lived overseas over there. Anything else to kind of fill in your background?
Well, thank you for that compliment. My background is kind of started out in the way you described it with Princeton and Bain & Company. I also kind of took a few years to work on my own startup, first doing some research as a Fulbright scholar in Jordan with farmers, and then building a company off of that research. That company was launched in London in the mid-2010s. And since then, I've been working also as a CPG executive on both the marketing and Amazon side. Happy to get into more details there, but that's kind of the high level.
Okay, cool. And I know we talked a little bit off air about the company you started. Let me just ask you a question. So right now you're, obviously helping grow other businesses, within the framework of these companies. What is the biggest thing you learned from your, entrepreneurial journey those couple of years, or biggest takeaway that you got from that?
My biggest takeaway was that, when I started out my business, I thought in order to succeed, I needed to know everything. And what I realized was that actually, if you've got a good idea of your starting point, your capacity and capability to learn and figure things out as you grow is tremendous. That was really my biggest learning. It was kind of a believe in yourself moment.
Yeah, I love that takeaway. Also, maybe kind of what you meant by that also is sometimes, we want to have everything right and perfect before we start a project. And, I think I heard what you just said was, hey, sometimes you just have to, you got to get started on it, right? We can't overplan it and overthink it because we may never get to that perfect moment. And so I think that's also a good lesson from that comment as well.
Yeah, that's totally right. And that, you mentioned some of the schools that I've attended. I'd say a big drawback actually of attending those schools, there are many pluses, but a big drawback is you are taught how to be an excellent student. And, an excellent student is the type of person, right, who learns all of the facts before the exam, right, is 100% prepared in order to get that A or that 100% on the exam. And that's not the way the real world works. If you continue to operate in that way, getting all of your ducks in a row before you actually execute anything, you may never get anything done. So that would be actually a big kind of framework of thinking that I had to deconstruct as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. You know what? It's so true. And I haven't heard anybody actually say that. So I think I'm really glad you said that. I just want to see it, say it just because I actually never went to one of those schools out of jealousy, but you're actually, it's actually so true. At the same time, once you kind of, have that, once you put those pieces together and are able to kind of, jump forward with taking that leap of faith, you will have the big advantage of then being able to know how to properly prepare. So I think they go hand in hand, but yeah, it's a good point. Hey, before we get into Boosted and what you're doing there, you went to some great universities. It looks like you travel. Did you grow up in the States or did you grow up overseas or?
Yeah, I grew up in Florida. I grew up my whole life on a small island in Florida.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Okay. And so then what do you think was in your background kind of most contributed to your success and, being able to go to these great schools and work for a company like Bain, which is really, really hard to get into?
Yeah. I think, growing up in Florida, I had, really, really lovely childhood. I was lucky enough to attend a good school, but it wasn't one of those feeder schools, like it was very clear to me from a young age that if I wanted to get out of Florida, I had to work extra hard to distinguish myself. And so it became clear to me that in order to even, consider going to a good school, I had to overachieve in every single subject area that I worked in. And so that was something that stayed with me for my whole life, was that, if you're gonna try to aim for one thing, well, you better aim for 100 things, because you might only get that one thing. And that's what happened. I mean, I applied to I don't know, more than 20 colleges, and then with Bain, oh man, you should see the list of companies that I applied to. It was a hustle. And I actually, my junior year of college, I got rejected from Bain for an internship. And it wasn't until I took another go at it the following year and I spent that full year preparing that I managed to get in. So it was just about really just putting in a lot of work to try to get my chances up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and a good example. And what do you think your biggest takeaway? So you kind of talked about great universities, but also, they can make you kind of over prepare and maybe that's not the best for entrepreneurship, but I'm sure there's a lot of good things you learned as well. So what do you think is if you're able to boil it down, what's your biggest takeaway, either, from your MBA at Stanford or from Princeton? Kind of your biggest thing that's kind of helped you, continue to be successful in life, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was different for each institution, and because they were different degrees. So I'll talk first about Princeton. What my biggest takeaway from being at Princeton was the importance of truly understanding the subject matter that you're going to try to master. So it was about doing your homework. I mean, this does get back to that idea of being a good student, and to your point, the importance of actually, knowing how to be a good student, even if you don't need to do that when you're an entrepreneur. But, I was around these classmates who, if I made any sort of claim about, let's say I was in a history class, if I made any sort of claim about, Japan's history and tried to build an argument off that, there were at least 5 people in that class who would fact check me, and it was relentless. And so what it really taught me was look, if you're going to try to actually put a stake in the ground or do something, you better know what you're talking about. So there's this importance of not sort of, bloviating about things, really being studied in what you're trying to talk about. And at Stanford, it was a different lesson. It was more of a real world lesson, which was, to some people might seem a little bit cynical, but it was a lesson about the importance of being well connected. And what I mean by that is, a lot of MBA programs are about building your network. so that you hear about the opportunities when they're still new, so that you understand at a higher level what dynamics are happening in your industry, so that you stay connected to those really smart people who know things that you may not have the time to learn yourself. And that was something that was very, very clear to me at Stanford. Those networks, those connections can determine a lot of success for people.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So true. That's what LinkedIn is for, but really, really true. And what I like about, from Princeton, also kind of what I heard you say there is also just being really open-minded, which I think is so important in business. If we have like a preconceived idea and we think and know something's right and we're really rigid about that, we can be wrong quite a bit and it can penalize us. So those are great lessons. Why don't we, jump into boosted commerce? Today, again, for all the listeners, we're going to talk about Amazon, but a really new concept really about aggregators, I guess is how I would term it. You guys might have a different name for it, but these are larger institutions that are buying up successful Amazon seller businesses. It seems to be a big macro trend right now. It's a really interesting one to me. And kind of with that, tell us a little bit about boosted commerce.
Yeah, sure. So Boosted Commerce is a company that buys businesses, e-commerce businesses, and we grow them. We view ourselves as being world-class e-commerce operators, and we really look to own what we call Fifth Avenue digital real estate. And one way to think about that, sort of, if you're thinking like, oh, well, that all sounds good, but it's a bunch of words, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. One way to think about it is like this. In the past, we almost all shoppers had to go into a store to purchase something. So if you walked into your local Walmart and you looked at the shelf, the products that you would see were owned by these CPG conglomerates, Procter & Gamble, Nestle, Unilever, who really owned those positions on the physical shelf. And owning those positions on the physical shelf meant that they got all the eyes. So anyone who walked into the store looked at their brand. And that was how they secured their dominance as brand owners. And as we've seen in the past decade or two, that's really started to change. And Amazon is one platform that best exemplifies that, which is there's no physical store where you need to, make sure foot traffic goes to your shelf. There's the digital shelf and there's a search algorithm. And so the people, the brands, the companies that really win in those spaces are the companies that understand how to get impressions, what we'd call in the Amazon world, glance views on your product. And when you're able to figure out how to do that, and it's partly search algorithm, SEO, optimization, or partly using the right ad tools, digital marketing tools. But once you're able to do that, well, then you own the digital shelf. And all of a sudden, you become a serious contender against the heavyweights like the Procter & Gambles of the world.
I really love how you introduced that. It's funny because going back it's probably about 10 years, Amazon wrote a book. It was called The Zero Moment of Truth. Really Google wrote a book called The Zero Moment of Truth. Okay. It was a free giveaway they would give to some of their bigger partners. And just the agency that we were working through at the time, I went to some events. I think this was over at like their office, the Google office in Chicago, and they handed out the book. And it was really interesting because it talks about, the Procter & Gamble and the first moment of truth, which they termed was like when the shopper was in the store and they saw the box on the aisle, right? And they call it the first moment of truth.
Yes.
And then I think the second moment was after they used it and they told a friend. Okay.
Right.
And now Google's saying now there's a zero moment of truth. This is when they find you online before they even go into the store. So it really kind of lines up good with what you're talking about, except it's gone from Google to Amazon now. Really quickly. So
yeah, that's so clever. Yeah, that terminology, first moment of truth, second moment of truth, that is the terminology that the big brands use. And they use it all the time with their brand managers and everything. They're using it all the time. what's going to happen at our second moment of truth, you know, and that's how they talk about brands and they talk about growth. So it sounds like Google, you know, had some insider knowledge there when they were writing that book.
Yeah. I found it really interesting, and I had never had any of that training. So I'm reading this going, well, duh, this is common sense. And it made immediate common sense to me. Okay, great. Well, that's really interesting about Boosted. And then tell us, you know, what you do over at Boosted. You know, what results maybe are you graded on, or how does your day-to-day look?
Right. Yeah. So I run a team of brand managers, and each brand manager, you know, has their brands that they own. And I work with them on a day-to-day basis to, you know, maintain and grow those brands. And, you know, that involves a whole set of initiatives, which ultimately becomes our secret sauce. But what we really look for is growth. And, you know, growth metrics happen at the revenue level, the profitability level, you know, the brand awareness level. Those are sort of the things that we keep in mind every single day as we're implementing those initiatives.
And these are, for the most part, all Seller Central marketplace brands that your brand managers are then running below you?
Yes.
That's so interesting. And do you guys use any type of organizational tools within Boosted that you're able to talk about? Is it proprietary? But I'm thinking, like, how are you kind of aggregating all of the KPIs or results and maybe creating dashboards? Is it like an ERP or just on Excel spreadsheets?
Yeah, it is. So that is private information. It's part of what makes us tick. But I will say that, you know, you're one of the first people to ask me that kind of question, and it's so interesting because it's one of the core things that drives success, right? Is like really understanding your data, where it comes from, knowing how to use that data. So it is something that's very important to our operations. Yeah,
that's great. Now let's think about, and again, you're on the ops side, really kind of like, in a way, kind of the sales side, how I would look at it. But you know, you're running, helping run these accounts and get results. But before they come into Boosted, you know, they have to be purchased. They have to show up on the radar as being, you know, a good product or a good brand that you guys would want to acquire. You know, what should these entrepreneurs right now who are running these businesses, what should they do to maybe get their company noticed by, you know, from a buyer like Boosted? How can they stand out?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, I mean, at a high level, we offer, what we offer is both for Amazon and Shopify business sellers, basically a 45-day, roughly 45-day closing process with a commitment to, you know, fair market value offers. And really what we pride ourselves on is like very transparent negotiations. So when, you know, the way I think about it for FBA sellers is, you know, you've been probably hustling for like 4 or 5 years to build these incredible businesses. And not until recently have you really had a great exit opportunity. And so I would think about Boosted as your partners in that exit opportunity. And I use the word partners very deliberately because, you know, we look at taking profitable brands and growing them significantly from that base. And so we're really looking for sellers who have not only, you know, achieved product market fit and are showing some traction on the profitability side, but we're also looking to support sellers in their journey after sale. And lots of times, you know, you have serial entrepreneurs who come in and sell, or people who want to go back to school and learn something. And we offer support in a lot of different areas there for those sellers. So we kind of look at ourselves as, you know, someone who's going to be going back to this point that I made about networks, actually. It's somebody we're going to be part of your network, and you're going to be part of our network. And it's really a relationship that's meant to last for a long time.
Yeah, that is awesome. And especially the 45-day closing, you know, for any of these brands that haven't gone through, you know, an acquisition process, that is a big advantage and a really nice thing to offer. What are you able to say any more about, like, obviously, you guys probably have some proprietary formula that says, hey, this one, passes the grade we want to go further, and this one doesn't. But besides size and profitability, is there anything else you can talk about? Are there certain, I guess what I want to frame it up in is what would be helpful for an operator right now? What should they be doing? Should they just focus on getting their margins to a certain level? Should they get into categories that are less competitive? Anything else you can kind of share on that side?
I think the way that I would think about it, you're right. We do have a kind of a formula where there are a bunch of different factors we look at independently, and we sort of put them together to assess businesses. But I would say if you're an operator right now and you're like, okay, I want to prepare my business for sale. I think what you need to really put your mind in, it differs so much for each business, but what I think you'd want to put your mind in is just start having the conversations now with Lucid. I wouldn't worry about doing things that you might feel like, oh, this is going to be a huge capital outlay for me. It's going to be really expensive for me to do this, or like I need to launch a whole bunch of products and use up all of my working capital to do that. No, I wouldn't look at it like that at all. We have a full understanding that sellers who come to us are looking for a company that has that size and that capital available to really take their brand to the next level. So I would just try to sort of, position your brand as best as possible for it to start getting taken to that next level. And that might mean, if you're selling skincare, that might mean, really making sure that you're paying attention to your customer service and making sure your repeat rates are great, and that people are really beginning to build brand loyalty for your products. And it might be different for other businesses, but that would be the sort of high level advice I would give on that.
Yeah, that's great. And then, what can they expect? Let's talk about multiples. And of course, a lot of this is proprietary, but in general terms, maybe at the industry level, what types of multiples and what kind of a multiple? Is it a cash flow, an SDE, an EBITDA multiple? A lot of these companies probably don't have, really sophisticated financials, I'm guessing. Some of them might, but would be interesting to kind of hear your thoughts on that side.
Yeah. So yeah, you're totally right. I can't talk about the specifics on multiples from Lucid's perspective, but I will talk a little bit about how I've seen it coming from the standard CPG arena to this e-commerce area. So historically, usually companies like Procter and Gamble or General Mills, etc., would buy companies off of a revenue-based multiple. And that was something that was, very typically done in the CPG area. And what we've seen is that has started to change a lot. And there aren't clear reasons for that necessarily, but that some of the ways people have been thinking about it is that, the revenue multiple previously incentivized companies to grow unprofitably. And then what acquirers were finding was that, well, after we acquire these businesses, we actually have a hard time getting them to profitability because they've been, selling things at such, low prices that's what's been driving volume. And once we bring them in, we can't get the prices to a place where they need to be to create a profitable business. So that all kind of precipitated a change in the CPG industry on how businesses are evaluated. And now what we're seeing more and more of is valuations on EBITDA multiples. And so that's what we're seeing as well in our industry. And I think it's pretty standard at this point, specifically for FBA and Shopify businesses.
Cool. And thanks for that. And I'll say this, I know you're not saying it. I've seen kind of in this consolidator industry, EBITDA multiples of, I think around like 4x or so. And for a lot, and I think it started out about 3. And of course I'm not on the inside here, Sarah, so you don't have to comment on this, but I've seen that. But I think what's kind of nice for sellers to think about is a lot of times, that'll be paid out at a and there's probably some holdover, some earn out, but a lot of times it's paid out as capital gains and all in one lump sum. And even though it only seems like, wow, you're only capturing 3 or 4 years of work, it actually ends up being a lot more because, when you're an operator and you're paying, ordinary income on a lot of this, and you're also having to reinvest a lot of proceeds, you're never actually able to pull out that much cash. I think that's what a lot of people, especially non-business owners, don't realize. I mean, you're having to reinvest that back in your business. So you're really pulling forward a lot more than 3 or 4 years, kind of when you look at how a transaction like that can come out. And that I think is specifically in that valuation, I think is just what I've read and talked to people specific to the Amazon space and this new consolidation happening. So it's pretty interesting. Again, you guys might be in a different area, but that's kind of a general number that I've heard. And there's a lot of ways that I think people should look at it. Not just simply as, wow, that's only 3 years. Why not work 3 more years or 4 more years? There's a lot more to it. So that's an interesting way to think about it. What do you think is, the future of Amazon now? And I'll ask this in a couple different ways. I mean, first, let's just talk about Amazon itself. I mean, they're just a beast, as everybody knows, and they're just taking more and more and more market share. I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody is positioned to stop them or push back on them, or even challenge them. Is that kind of the same way that you guys see it on your end?
Yeah, I'm speaking sort of as Sarah and less as Sarah from Boost eCommerce, but I do see that. I mean, there are a couple of forces happening. One is that the kind of the devastation that COVID brought to the world, both on a health scale and also on an economic scale, shifted a lot of people's purchasing to e-commerce. So everyone knows this story already. E-commerce over the past year has grown at a much faster clip than previous years because of what the pandemic has done to shopper habits. So on that hand, in that way, you see Amazon growing incredibly quickly and getting bigger and bigger. At the same time, I am starting to see this kind of specialization start to take place where, for example, luxury brands have had a hard time. Amazon's had a hard time getting luxury brands on the platform. And some specialized e-com retailers like Sephora, for example, have done a great job of maintaining their presence in e-commerce. They've really prioritized e-commerce in that way, and taken a little bit of those impressions and that web traffic away from Amazon. I would say at a high level, what is Amazon's future? Where is it going? I wouldn't be so bold as to assume that I know, but I would say that there is going to be a need for brands and companies on Amazon to really assert the strengths of their brands, the quality of their products, to double down on the investment they've made in their customers and the trust that they've built with their customers in order for those brands to maintain relevancy on Amazon. Beyond that, Amazon will continue, I believe, to be the go-to platform for those products that you simply can't find anywhere else, or you don't want to spend 4 days searching for, a replacement piece for, something that broke at home. You're not going to necessarily go out to 4 different home improvement stores to try to track it down. You might just do a quick search on Amazon and buy it there. So those are a few of the ways that I see it shaking out over the long term.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it is actually healthy. I think you brought the Sephora example. Hopefully that there's more of that. I think it's good to have that kind of diversity of different retailers that are out there. I know Wayfair's doing great, Home Depot's doing great. Those are huge companies, but it seems like a lot of smaller ones have been crushed, and it's kind of, we saw the same thing in brick and mortar with Walmart. So it'll be hopefully, that there, these companies find a way. And I think you're right, for luxury and in other categories, the consumers do want a different experience sometimes. What about for actual businesses? So, going back, let's say 10 years ago, it was pretty easy to rank online. You weren't a lot of major players. Google kind of allowed for a lot of different websites to, sell and be strong retailers. Then all of a sudden, the big companies woke up, Home Depot, Walmart, Target, et cetera, et cetera. They built their marketing departments and they started, crushing a lot of smaller companies. They have the dollars to pay for the larger, and then they also started paying a lot more on the paid advertising side, and those conversion rates dropped and ROAS dropped over time. And then of course, Amazon came in as well. So what happened was there was just a ton of consolidation online. Do you see the same thing happening on Amazon? Like, do you see a future where in 5 or 10 years, there actually isn't, tens and hundreds of thousands of sellers? There's a lot less because these aggregators came in with better business models and kind of ended up dominating that space?
Well, I would say I certainly hope not. I really certainly hope not. I think that if anything, we're just introducing more players to the pie, and in many ways, hopefully, just growing that pie. A lot of what companies on Amazon care about is making sure that they build up a real, as I mentioned before, a real brand presence. And what that does, and what Amazon's system rewards companies for, is bringing additional traffic to the platform. And so I would say it would be a tremendous shame if there was consolidation at the product level. And I think Amazon is working in many ways against that, as are others, frankly. We want the pie to grow. We don't want the pie to stay stagnant and get split up against a smaller and smaller number of players. There are a few things that will guard against that. I think one thing that will guard against that is just the exact dynamic of the digital shelf. That when you have a search page that has X number of results, unless somebody comes in and decides to own every single one of the brands on those page results, and that's quite a feat if someone can do that, but it's unlikely, then they're going to be able to, you're going to always be able to see a diversity of products there. And again, Amazon's algorithm works to exactly allow for that, allow for a frictionless marketplace where sellers can constantly come on board and sell their products, and the best product wins out. So I would hope, and I think this is true for everyone, that we are growing the pie. We're not just splitting it up amongst a fewer number of players.
Yeah, that's actually, it's a great example because there are so many different brands competing. You're right; it'd be really hard for larger aggregators to buy all of those up, and they keep changing on Amazon. It seems. I mean, everything is so dynamic. So
exactly. It's so true. And I'll even give you, I worked at a brand owned by Procter and Gamble, and now one of the brands that I have that we work with at Boosted is a really credible threat to Procter and Gamble on a few keywords that they compete on. And this is a tiny brand. This is like David and Goliath. And so, yes, we own that brand now, and we're an aggregator, but the scale is just much smaller than a Procter and Gamble scale, and yet there it is competing on page one of search results, right? And that would be for me. That's the proof is in the pudding there.
Yeah, well, that is a really good example. And then, maybe Boosted could really do well on that one if P&G comes calling for it. So maybe that's like the ultimate play down the road. But yeah, that is a cool example there. Thanks for that one. Hey, Sarah, before I let you leave, this is a little bit of a different question, but look, you quickly, kind of grew your career, have had a lot of opportunities. Right now, a lot of kids, and I just say this, I have college age kids, and some of them who are graduating, it's been a tough transition because with COVID, the job market got hurt for the kids who were graduating then. And now there's another whole group of kids graduating this summer into it. What is kind of, your advice for up and coming leaders, just from your experience, maybe finishing up this podcast, what would you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I'll leave them with one word. And I think that word is access. And access boils down to a few things. It boils down to access to knowledge, access to people, and access to institutions. And I think it's incredibly important, especially with the dynamics of our economy in the U.S., to ensure that you're going after access to the right education, institution, and the right network. And the way to do that, it can be a lot of different ways. It can be through the college that you're applying to. It can be through your parents' friends. It can be through just a stellar set of books that you pore over every night. Whatever your method of doing it, keep in mind the idea of access, because the more access you gain, the more understanding you'll have of the economy that you're entering, and the more success you'll have as a result of that.
Well, that's great advice. And Sarah, how can people, learn about you or learn about Boosted? Is LinkedIn the best spot, or anywhere else you want to direct them to?
Yeah, you feel free to go to boostedcommerce.com if you'd like to learn more about Boosted. If you're a seller, I encourage you to check out our Sellers Circle program there. And if you'd like to reach out to me directly, feel free. My email is Sarah with an H at boostedcommerce.com.
Awesome. And we'll have that in the show notes. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Hope you all enjoyed the interview today. Truly appreciate your reviews and hope you join us on the next interview.
Thank you.